empty. Frank stumbled out of the black house. The door shut behind him and he collapsed against the wall, overcome with guilt. Fortunately, the catalepons had cleared off. He might have just sat there and let them trample him. He deserved nothing better. He left Hazel inside, dying and defenseless, at the mercy of a crazy farmer god. "Kill farmers!" Aris screamed in his head. "Return to Legion and fight the Greeks," Mars said. "What are we doing here? Killing farmers!" Aris screamed back. "Shut up!" Frank yelled loud. "Both of you!" A couple of old ladies were shuffled past. They gave Frank a strange look and muttered something in Italian and kept going. Frank stared miserably at Hazel's cavalry sword lying at his feet next to his backpack. He could run back to the Argo too and get Leo. Maybe Leo could fix the chariot. But Frank somehow knew this wasn't a problem for Leo. It was Frank's task. He had to prove himself. Besides, the chariot wasn't exactly broken. There was no mechanical problem. It was missing a serpent. Frank could turn himself into a python when he'd woken up that morning as a giant snake. Perhaps it's been a sign from the gods. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life turning the wheel of a farmer's chariot. But if it meant saving Hazel? No, there had to be another way. Serpents, Frank thought. Mars. Did his father have some connection to snakes? Mars' sacred animal was the wild boar, not the serpent. Still, Frank was sure he'd heard something once. He could only think of one person to ask. Fortunately, he opened his mind to the voices of the war god. "I need a snake," he told him. "How?" "Ha ha!" Eris screamed. "Yes, the serpent. Like that vile Cadmus," Mars said. We punished him for killing our dragon." They both started yelling until Frank thought his brain would split in half. "Okay, stop!" The voices quieted. "Cadmus," Frank muttered. "Cadmus." The story came back to him. The demigod Cadmus had slain a dragon that happened to be a child of Eris. How Eris ended up with a dragon for a son. Frank didn't want to know, but as a punishment for the dragon's death, Eris turned Cadmus into a snake. "So you can turn your enemies into snakes," Frank said. "That's what I need. I need to find an enemy. Then you can turn him into a snake." "You think I would do that for you, Eris thought? You have not proven you're worthy." Only the greatest hero could ask such a boon, Mars said. "A hero like Romulus." "Too Roman," Eris shouted. "Diomedus." "Never," Mars shouted back. That cow fell to Heracles. "Horatius, then," Eris suggested. Mars went silent. Frank sensed a grudging agreement. "Horatius," Frank said. "Fine, if that's what it takes. I will prove I'm as good as Horatius." What did he do? Images flooded in Frank's mind. He saw a lone warrior standing on a stone bridge facing an entire army massed on the far side of the Tiber River. Frank remembered the legend. Horatius, the Roman general, had single-handedly held off a horde of invaders, sacrificing himself on that bridge to keep the barbarians from crossing the Tiber by giving his fellow Romans time to finish their defences. He'd saved the Republic. "Venice is overrun," Mars said, "as Rome was about to be. Cleanse it." "Destroy them all," Aris said. "Put them to the sword." Frank pushed the voices to the back of his mind. He looked at his hands and was amazed they weren't trembling. Alright, For the first time in days, his thoughts were clear. He knew exactly what he needed to do. He didn't know how he would pull it off. The odds of dying were excellent, but he had to try. Hazel's life depended on him. He strapped Hazel's sword to his belt, morphed his backpack into a quiver and bow, and raced towards the piazza, where he'd fought the cow monsters. The plan had 3 phases: dangerous, really dangerous, and insanely dangerous. Frank stopped at the old stone well. No catoblepones in sight. He drew Hazel's sword and used it to prise up some cobblestone, unearthing a big tangle of spiky roots. The tendrils unfurled, exuding their stinky green fumes as they crept towards Frank's feet. In the distance, a catoblep's foghorn moan filled the air. Others joined in from all different directions. Frank wasn't sure how the monsters could tell he was harvesting their favourite fruit. Maybe they just had an excellent smell of food. He had to move fast now. He sliced off a long cluster of vines and laced them, though one of his belt loops, trying to ignore the burning and itching of his hands. Soon he had a glowing, stinking lasso of poison weeds. Hooray! The first few catoblepones lumbered into the piazza. Blowing in anger, green eyes glowed under their manes. Their long snouts blew clouds of gas like furry steam engines. Frank knocked an arrow. He had momentary pang of guilt. These were not the worst monsters he'd met. They were basically grazing animals that happened to be poisonous. Hazel is dying because of them, he reminded himself. He let the arrow fly to the nearest catobleps collapsed, crumbling to dust. He knocked a second arrow, but the rest of the herd was almost on top of him. More were charging into the square from the opposite direction. Frank turned into a lion. He roared defiantly and leaped towards the archway straight over the heads of the second herd. The 2 groups of catoblepones slammed into each other but quickly recovered and ran after him. Frank hadn't been sure the roots would still smell when he changed form. Usually his clothes and possessions just sort of smelled into his animal shape, but apparently he still smelled like a yummy poisoned dinner. Each time he raced past a catobleps, it roared with outrage and joined the Kill Frank parade. He turned onto a larger street and pushed through the crowds of tourists. What the model saw, he had no idea. A cat being chased by a pack of dogs. People cursed Frank in about 12 different languages. Gelato cones went flying. A woman spilled a stack of carnival masks. One dude toppled it into the canal. When Frank glanced back, he had at least two dozen monsters on his tail, but he needed more. He needed all the monsters in Venice. He had to keep the ones behind him enraged. He found an open spot in the crowd and turned back into a human. He drew Hazel's spatha. Never his preferred weapon, but it was big enough and strong enough that the heavy cavalry sword didn't bother him. In fact, it was glad for this extra reach. He slashed the golden blade, destroying the first catobleps and letting the others bunch up in front of him. He tried to avoid their eyes, but he could feel their gaze burning into him. He figured that all of these monsters breathed on him at once. Their combined noxious cloud would be enough to melt him into a puddle. The monsters crowded forward and slammed into one another. Frank yelled, You want my poison roots? Come and get them! He turned into a dolphin and jumped into the canal. He hoped catoblepones couldn't swim. At the very least, they seemed reckoned to follow him, and he couldn't blame them. The canal was disgusting, smelly, and salty, and as warm as soup. But Frank fought through it, dodging gondolas and speedboats, pausing occasionally to titter dolphins' insults at the monsters who followed him on the sidewalks. When he reached the nearest gondola dock, Frank turned back into a human again, stabbed a few more caterpillars to keep them angry, and took off running. So it went. After a while, Frank fell into a kind of daze. He attracted more monsters, scattered more crowds and tourists, and he led now massive following of caterpillars through the windy streets of Old City. Whenever he needed a quick escape, he dived into a canal as a dolphin, or turned into an eagle and soared overhead, but he could never go far too ahead of his pursuers. Whenever he felt like the monsters might be losing interest, he stopped on the rooftop, drew his bow, picking off a few caterpillar bones in the center of the herd. He took his lasso over the poison vines and insulted the monsters, bad breath stirring them into a fury. But then he continued the race. He backtracked, lost his way. Once he turned into a corner and ran into the tail of his own monster's mob. He should have been exhausted, yet somehow he found the strength to keep going, which was good. The hardest part was yet to come. He spotted a couple of bridges, but they didn't look right. One was elevated and completely covered. No way he could get the monsters to funnel through it. Another was too crowded with tourists. Even if the monsters ignored the mortals, that noxious gas couldn't be good for anyone to breathe. The bigger the monster herd got, the more mortals would get pushed aside, knocked into the water, or trampled. Finally, Frank saw something that would work. Just ahead, past the big piazza, a wooden bridge spanned one of the widest canals. The bridge itself was a latticed arc of timber, like an old-fashioned roller coaster, about 50 meters long. 50 meters long! Wow, that's long. From above in eagle form, Frank saw no monsters on the far side. Every caterpillars in Venice seemed to have joined the herd and was pushing through the streets behind him as the tourists screamed and scattered, maybe thinking they were caught in the midst of a stray dog stampede. The bridge was empty of food traffic. It was perfect. Frank dropped like a stone and turned back to human form. He ran to the middle of the bridge and at a natural choke point and threw his bait of poisonous root on the deck. Behind him, as the front of the caterpillars herd reached the base of the bridge, Frank drew Hazel's golden spather. "Come on," he yelled. "You want to know what Frank Zang is worth? Come on." He realized he wasn't just shouting at the monsters. He was venting weeks of fear and rage and resentment. The voices of Mars and Ares screamed right along with him. The monsters charged. Frank's vision turned red. Later, he could remember the details clearly. He sliced through monsters until he was ankle-deep in yellow dust. Whenever he got overwhelmed and the clouds of gas began to choke him, he changed shape, became an elephant, a dragon, a lion, and each transformation seemed to clear his lungs, giving him a fresh burst of energy. His shape-shifting became so fluid, he could start an attack in human form with his sword, and finish as a lion, raking his swords across the caterpillar's snout. The monsters kicked with their hooves. They breathed noxious gas and glared straight at Frank with their poisonous eyes. He should have died. He should have been trampled, but somehow he stayed on his feet, unharmed and unleashed a hurricane of violence. He didn't feel any sort of pleasure in this, but he didn't hesitate either. He stabbed one monster and beheaded another. He turned into a dragon and bit a caterpillar in half. He changed into an elephant and trampled three at once. under his feet. His vision was still tinted red, and he realized his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. He was actually glowing, surrounded by a rosa aura. He didn't understand why, but he kept fighting until there was only one monster left. Frank faced it with his sword drawn. He was out of breath, sweaty and caked in monster dust, but he was unharmed. The catobleps snarled, but it must have not been the smartest monster, despite the fact that 700 of his brethren had just died. It did not go back down. It did not back down. Mars, Frank yelled. I've proven myself, now I need a snake. Frank doubted anyone had ever shouted those words before. It was a kind of weird request. He got no answer. From the skies, for once, the voices in his head were silenced. The catobleps not lost patience. He launched itself at Frank and left him no choice. He slashed upwards. As soon as his blade hit the monster, the catobleps disappeared in a flash of blood. Red light. When Frank's vision cleared, a mottled brown Burmese python was coiled at his feet. Well done, said a familiar voice. Standing a few feet away was his dad, Mars, wearing a red beret, an olive fatiguous with the insignia of the Italian Special Forces, and a soft rifle was slung over his shoulder. His face was hard and angular. His eyes covered with dark sunglasses. Father, Frank managed. He couldn't believe what he'd just done. The terror started to catch up with him. He felt like sobbing, but he guessed that would not be a good idea in front of Mars. It's natural to feel fear. The war god's voice was surprisingly warm, full of pride. All great warriors are afraid. Only the stupid and delusional are not. But you faced your fear, my son. You did what you had to do, like Horatius. This was your bridge, and you defended it. I wasn't sure what to say. I just needed a snake. A tiny smile tugged in Mars' mouth. Yes, and now you have one. Your bravery hasn't united my forms, Greek and Roman, if only for a moment. Go, save your friends. But hear me, Frank. Your greatest test is yet to come when you face the armies of Gaia at Epirus, your leadership. Suddenly the god doubled out over, clutching his head. His form flickered. His fatigus turned into a toga, then a biker's jacket and jeans. His rifle changed into a sword, and then a rocket launcher. Agony, Mars bellowed. Go! Hurry! Frank didn't answer the questions. Despite his exhaustion, he turned into a giant eagle, snatched up the python in his massive claws, and launched himself into the air. When he glanced back, a miniature mushroom cloud erupted from the middle of the bridge, rings of fire washing outwards and pairs of voices. Mars and Ares screamed, No! Frank wasn't sure what had just happened, but he had no time to think about it. He flew over the city, now completely empty of monsters, and headed for the house of Triptolemus. You found one, the farmer god exclaimed. Frank ignored him. He stormed into La Casanera, dragging the python by its tail like a vase straight in Santa Claus' bag, and dropped it next to the bed. He knelt at Hazel's side. He was still alive and shivering, barely breathing, but alive. As for Nico, he was still a corn plant. Heal them, Frank said. Now! Triptolemus crossed his arms. How do I know the snake will work? Frank gritted his teeth. Since the explosion on the bridge, the voices of the war god had gone silent in his head, but he still felt their combined anger churning inside him. He felt physically different too. Had Triptolemus got shorter? The snake is a gift from Mars, Frank growled. It will work, as if on cue. The Burmese python slithered over the chariot and wrapped itself around the right wheel. The other snake woke up. The two serpents checked each other out, touching noses, then turned their wheels in unison. Then the chariot inched forward, its wings flapping. You see, Frank said. Now heal my friends. Triptolemus tapped his chin. Well, thank you for the steak, but I'm not sure I like your tone, demigod. Perhaps I'll turn you into... Frank was faster. He lunged at Trip and slammed him into the wall. His fingers locked around the god's throat. Think about your next words, Frank warned. Deadly calm, or instead of you beating my sword in your plugshare, I will beat you into your head. Try Triptolemus gulped. You know, I think I'll hear your friends. Swear it on the river Styx. I swear it on the river Styx. Frank released him. Triptolemus touched his throat, and as if making sure it was still there, he gave Frank a nervous smile, edged around him, and scurried off to the front room, just gathering herbs. Frank watched as the god picked leaves and roots and crushed them into mortar. He rolled a pill-sized ball of green goop and jogged to Hazel's side. He placed the gunk ball under Hazel's tongue. Instantly she shuddered and sat up coughing. Her eyes flew open. The greenish tint in her skin disappeared. She looked around to be wild until she saw Frank. What? Frank tackled her in a hug. You're going to be fine, he said fiercely. Everything is fine. But Hazel gripped his shoulders and stared at him in amazement. Frank, what happened to you? To me? He stood suddenly self-conscious. I don't. He looked down and realized what she meant. Triptolemus had got shorter. Frank was taller. His gut hadn't shrunk. His chest seemed bulkier. Frank had grown spurts before. Once he'd woken up 2 centimeters taller than when he'd gone to sleep. But this was nuts. It was as if some of the dragon and lion had stayed with him when he turned back to human. Maybe I can fix it. Hazel laughed with delight. Why, you look amazing. I do. Frank stared at him. Barley! In front of the room, take some of my special barley. Make it into little cakes. Eat these before you step into the house of Hades. The barley will absorb the worst of the poison, so it will affect you, but not kill you. That's it, Michael demanded. Her cake sent us halfway across Italy, so you can tell us to eat barley. Good luck, Triptolemus sprinted across the room and hopped in his chariot. And Frank ran, I forgive you. You've got to spunk. If you ever change your mind, my offer is open. I'd love to see you to get a degree in farming. Yeah, Frank muttered. Thanks. The god pulled a lever on the chariot. The snake wheels turned. The wings flapped at the back of the room. The garage doors opened. Automobile again, Crick cried. So many ignorant lands I need of my knowledge. I will teach them the glories of tilling, irrigation, fertilizing. The chariot lifted off and zipped out of the house. Triumphalus was shouting to the sky, Away, my serpents! Away! That, Hazel said, was very strange. The glories of fertilizing. Michael brushed some corn silk off his shoulder. Can we get out of here now? Hazel put her hand on Frank's shoulder. I'm okay, really. You battled for our lives. What did Triumphalus make you do? Frank tried to hold it together. He scolded himself for feeling so weak. He could face an army of monsters, but as soon as Hazel showed him the kindness, he wanted to break down and cry. Those cow monsters, cartoblepones, that poisoned you, I had to destroy them." "That was brave," Nico said. "There must have been, 6 or 7 left in that herd?" "No," Frank with them. His cloak. "All of them. I killed all of them in the city." Nico and Hazel stared at him in stunned silence. Frank was afraid they might doubt him or start to laugh. How many monsters had he killed on the bridge? 200, 300? But he saw in their eyes that they believed in him. They were the children of the underworld. Maybe they could sense death or carnage he'd unleashed. Hale kissed his cheek. She had to stand on her tiptoes to do it now. Her eyes were incredibly sad, as if she realized something had changed in Frank. Something much more important than physically gross word. Frank knew it too. He would never be the same. He just, wasn't sure if that was a good idea. "Well," Nico said, breaking tension, does anyone know what barley looks like?"